This is the Storypunks podcast, the show where we talk about all the punks. So steampunk, dieselpunk, cyberpunk, and all the other punks. I'm your host, Cindy Grigg. This is episode 20. It is Steampunk today with Michael Rigg. He's a podcaster. He also is a live action role player. So yes, a proud LARPer. And he has actually taken his novel and turned it into a live action role playing game, which he is podcasting. And it's so cool. He's calling it Transmedia, and other people have referred to this, where you take the same storyline and you go into different types of productions, which is so cool. Super fun. It's steampunk themed, and we're going to talk all about it today. So very exciting. Now, for my personal update, I am working on consolidating all of the information I gained from traveling to Bolivia. And I gave a really quick overview, shared some pictures last episode, when I was doing my update about this trip. I did have to come home early. I have explained that I am actually in a wheelchair recovering or trying to figure out what my next steps are. I am still working toward creating my very final draft of the Salt Sheen Paradox, book 1, which does feature time travel. And it's anchored in Salt Lake City, Utah in the 1920s. But my character does travel to modern day Bolivia and points beyond. And I know that may sound like a really weird combination, but this deco-punk / diesel-punk thriller, it will make more sense, I guess, once you get into it, because there are some really cool connections. And one of those things that I've been working with this week in the town of Uni, so that is close to the Salt Flats that are famous. You know, everybody takes those perspective shots where it looks like, you know, you've got a Godzilla dinosaur or something, and it's a figurine, but then you make yourself the same size. Or, for example, my group that I toured with, we came out of a Pringles can and, you know, danced around and then went back into the Pringles can, stuff like that. You've probably seen these. If not, Google it. You spell Uni, Uyuni, but it's also a town, and it's a really interesting town. It's actually a railroad town where, that's why there's a train cemetery there. And I shared these pictures last week of these people, these sculptures. There's a woman and there's also a man. At least those are the two that I saw. There might be more, but they're made out of train parts. So the trains are a really important part of the city and this culture. So I call it a city. It's a town. And so I've been writing about that. I've been getting my thoughts together about La Paz and the ruins of Tiwanaku, and just all kinds of things from the different regions of Bolivia. And I'll admit, my favorite part that I'm getting to write this week, the very first place I went in Bolivia, and just I would totally suggest starting any Bolivian trip in Sucre, because its elevation is very moderate and it helps you acclimatize. It's just gorgeous. All the buildings are white, or a lot of them are white. And so you look out across the rooftops, you've got these gorgeous clay rooftops, and it's just a really cool way to get started on a trip that can be pretty taxing when it comes to getting around, understanding the money, the culture, all the different things. Bolivia is getting more popular, but it's not like a super easy place to get around in. So yeah, I can totally suggest that. And so many amazing museums, textile museums especially. And there was also a really cool vintage costuming museum. I was staying in Sucre. I was staying at a hotel, and the previous owner of that hotel was actually the woman who put together this costume museum that was just down the street. And so I went and checked it out, and tons of cool stuff, like from, the Victorian era and beyond. And then I also went through Potosi, and that town, which is a mining town, it's built on a hill. It rivaled Paris at one time. And so these towns are so interesting. there's kind of a rise and fall in some of the development of these towns. And yeah, so it's more than just going to uni if you go to Bolivia. And this week I'm writing about Sucre, and then I'll just be wrapping things up and bringing it all together. So I hope to have this ready to beta read soon. And so you can always find out the status of what's available to read for free or what books are out and all of that. No matter when you're hearing this recording, you can find that at cindygrigg.com. So CINDYGRIGG.com. And I think that's about it. So without further ado, let's get right into this really cool theme-driven interview, because I'm actually going to start with a trailer that he's given me. So again, he plays his game on his podcast live. So that's pretty cool. Check it out.
I'm a very patient person.
A body falls past the window. Whatever. And you put it down and you feel like shaky all over. Both your hands are covered. Immediately peg him as a cogman.
So we've known each other for years.
It's Sumeshi. One of the knives is missing from a garter hilt because it is being pressed to your throat.
Damn. We had a...
Oh my God!
So you took money from him, huh?
We talked about this earlier.
Innocently attacked by the forces of the American Confederation.
Yeah. Are you constantly checking for traps?
The Steamrollers Adventure Podcast is available at rigstories.com or on iTunes. You can also get it at Stitcher and Google Play.
Michael Rigg knew he was destined to tell fantastic stories from the age of 12. It was the summer of 1977, and a little inconsequential film called Star Wars ignited his imagination and opened his mind and heart to the infinite possibilities of storytelling. He studied film and philosophy in college before switching his focus to writing when a creative writing professor pointed out, you don't have to deal with actors and producers, weather, and catering. The budget for a writer's special effects amounts to $0. You can set your story any place you want, and Michael never heard the rest of the advice. He was already filling pages in his mind with fantastic adventures, thrillers, and mysteries. His keyboard became the camera. His monitor became the big screen. And I know so many of our listeners can relate. This is an awesome bio.
Thank you.
In 2007, after several novels he shared only with his closest family and friends, Michael decided to try an experiment. He wrote an entire novel, a chapter a week, directly into a blog. This blog novel became his window to the world and brought him fans and critics from every corner of the globe. Then in 2011, he began plotting out the characters and settings of a unique universe caught between realities. An urban fantasy flavored with steampunk visions in a mythical time of ghouls and witches, soldiers and airships, magic and espionage. The Heart of Bronze universe was born. Michael lives in Chicago, Illinois with his lovely wife Melanie and their Italian greyhounds, Daisy, Maggie, and Apollo. Awesome names. When he's not writing, he soaks up every possible media where fantasy thrives and the imagination reigns. As a transmedia artist, he enjoys sharing his own crazy thoughts through his self-proclaimed title, Storycrafter. So again, Michael, welcome onto the show. I can't wait to get started with these questions.
Thank you so much, Cindy. It's great to be here. And yeah, we do. Do people often put an S at the end of your name?
All the time. All the time.
Yeah, drives me crazy.
And it's okay. You know what? Actually, I think it's kind of dropped off. It was all the time when I was younger. Why did it change? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think there are far more Riggs than there are Riggs, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so on this show, we talk about the punks. So let's dive right in with that first question I always like to ask. How do you define steampunk? What's inbounds? What's out of bounds? What's your definition of the term?
Well, I got to run and catch a bus response is Victorian science fiction. And I've heard other people say that, and Victorian fantasy, things like that. But I gave it a lot of thought, and especially with like my universe, I see steampunk as any genre you could think of: horror, mystery, detective thrillers, even science fiction, romance, and slow down technological history so that any of those genre are filled with things like airships and gears and goggles and steam. And that's basically how I see steampunk.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that you call it the catch the bus response. It's so vivid. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so cool. And I love that you talk about how it can be all those different classical genres and that steampunk can lend itself to all those different ones, because just this week alone, I've interviewed people, or I guess it would be last week alone, I interviewed several people who were writing in different genres, and they observed to me, it's crazy that I can write and in all these different genres, there's this through line, and that's what they loved about steampunk. So,
right. Yeah,
so
exactly. Cool. And and I know that there are so many different variations on steampunk that, I mean, of course, as an American, my gravitation is toward the Wild West kind of scenario, but it had all of its roots, and its biggest thing is the Victorian England era, and there's Asian steampunk and African steampunk, and in all of that, it's not just, I don't see it as cultures of the world. I see it as different types of stories in the world. It's like my universe has a lot of mythical stuff to it, and mysticism, magic, and fantasy, as well as urban fantasy and some twisted history.
So cool. So cool. Well, let's talk about your works, because I know many listeners are already very familiar with you and with your podcast, which is the Steamrollers Adventure Podcast. Also, you've had these blog novels like you talk about. So will you take us through your work for anyone who's just absolutely new?
Yeah, sure. It all started, I guess, over time, I had written a few novels, and my background was kind of in the Stephen King type of thing, a horror and mystery and that kind of thing. And, growing up writing and coming through college in the 80s, before, real internet explosion and things like Kindle Direct Publishing and things like that with Amazon, I did the rounds of trying to send manuscripts to as many publishers as possible. And some were favorable, some were not, and none were ever picked up. But then I had an idea. I wanted to have a blog, didn't know what to put into it. So I just started writing fiction. And I honestly had never even heard of steampunk before. I didn't even know it was a thing. Just off the top of my head, started writing this story. It was kind of like an alternate history, and then it just kind of exploded from there. And then I realized that, hey, this thing already exists, so I kind of took it from there. So
that's so cool.
I transferred the blog novel to actual paper and electronics, and a friend of mine actually self-published through Amazon. So I thought, I'll give that a shot. And the feedback I got from it was awesome. I mean, if I could just tell you real quick, my favorite critique, my favorite review on my novel, my first novel, the best one was 1 star. Because
really?
I got a lot of 5 stars.
No, I know.
My favorite was this 1 star review that said, "It's a shame that such a wonderful story with such great characters is so poorly written." And I was like,
"Oh, gee,
I have a wonderful story with great characters. That's awesome."
Yeah. Well, way to see the bright side of that, because sometimes you get really bogged down in reviews.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of do-it-yourself authors, I'm very rusty on the mechanics. I mean, there are others that are better on the mechanics and not so good on the story. That's why I call myself a story crafter rather than a writer, because I like just making stuff up.
Very cool. Very cool. So take us through how you went from story to podcast.
All right.
Or was it in that order, I'm assuming?
Yeah. No, definitely. The novel came first, and to go back to like high school, the early 80s and into college, I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. Go figure, I'm a nerd. and did that for a long time. And I'm also, I joke with my wife that I'm enumerate. I usually, when we're at a restaurant, I let her figure out the tip, even though it's really easy to do because I just don't like numbers. So what I would do is I would take the Dungeons and Dragons rules, which are a lot of numbers and dice and whatnot, and change it so that it's more focused on storytelling, improvisation, acting, and role play. And I started listening to other podcasts. I got into podcasts, but mostly ones about writing and things like that, and really wanted to do one myself. But I didn't feel like I was a voice for how to be a writer or tips or tricks for writers or anything like that. So I'm like, what could I do that is sustaining? And was talking to one of my friends who I used to play D&D with back in school, and just suddenly came to me. It's like, oh, why don't we do just record us playing D&D? And then I thought, but I really kind of wanted to involve my book as well. And then the two just kind of crashed together, and I decided to translate the Heart of Bronze universe into a role-playing game.
So
and
cool.
Just turned on microphones and we went from there.
Oh, wow. Well, a lot of it is just taking that plunge. It can be so hard to do, but
yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. So the Heart of Bronze universe, since that is so important to your books as well as to your podcast, the Steamrollers podcast, will you tell us just a little bit about that universe, that world?
Yeah. Well, of course it's steampunk, but the thing, and I guess the main history of it is the what if of the South winning the Civil War, and changing history. But I know a lot of your listeners right now are like, okay, yeah, I've heard that one before. It's like one of if you're going to do alternate history, that's one of the easy ones to go for. But with me, that fantasy and science fiction twist to it is that there is some other force at work here, and it's not just a turning point in history, it's a lot of turning points in history. So even though there are some things that couldn't have happened with the South winning the Civil War, they might happen anyway because something else has been turned along the way. It's like I'm fascinated with the whole butterfly effect phenomenon, and in this case, it's not just one branch going off. It's like branches upon branches upon branches. So I'm really fascinated by alternate reality, alternate history. My category for my first novel was time travel / steampunk. I guess it was more of a niche that way. And I actually became, for the first 3 hours, I was number one in time travel because there was no such thing as time travel steampunk. But
nice.
But yeah, because I guess my niche would be, or my I guess flavor would be somewhere around fantasy.
Yeah.
Because my stories I introduced witches and ghouls and monstrosities like that, but intermingling that with things like warfare between the North and the South, and Sherlock Holmesian style mysteries. And there's even a character running through the podcast that shows up in newspapers called John Stitch, and that's our universe's Jack the Ripper. So yeah, lots of twisted stuff in there.
And lots of characters. If you go to the website, you will see this cast of characters that's just really impressive. Tons of people have helped out with the podcast, right?
Yes. Oh yeah. Aside from the regular cast at the table, we have other players who Skype in. And in addition to that, I started a voice actors guild of sorts for other people, because I had a lot of people interested in the show, but only could fit so many people in the game, the recorded game story.
Sure.
But didn't want to turn anybody down. So I thought, hey, since my production has the theatrical element to it, it would be great to get unique background voices and things like that. So I started getting, I would put together scripts, and I have a group of, I think it's like 7 or 10 people I send out to, and if they feel it, they record it and send it back to me, and I credit them. And if they have something I could plug for them, then I'll do that. And it could be anything from background chatter in a diner to, someone calling for a taxi, or a news crier, or a soldier screaming in the battlefield.
Awesome.
So,
Very cool. So what was your background when it came to audio or all this production side of it? Are you someone that has always been into, hey, I'm going to do these sound effects, I'm going to put this together in a show? Or what was your background like with that?
Well, my first major in college was film and TV. So I was really into video production, and made a lot of movies as a kid growing up, and wanted to be a Steven Spielberg, but that never happened. And since getting into the podcast, at first it was just going to be, hey, let's turn on the microphones and play a game, record it. The game would be part of the story, which would be part of the universe of my books. Listening to it, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if things that were described you could actually hear? Like cars going by, airships flying through the sky, a clock ticking in a room, a fireplace, background chatter, things like that. And I just started diving into it. I scoured the internet looking for things that would fit within Creative Commons, and there's tons of it. And then beyond that, I decided I'm going to do music. I found some great sites for music that are Creative Commons shareable or free, and put down music beds. I even assigned themes to certain characters. So it's become almost like a movie with your eyes closed.
Yeah.
That's how I like to think of it.
And a hands-free movie. That's how I like to, just because I'm so busy. It's so nice to have a drama or, a comedy, whatever, but a story that I can hear while I'm doing stuff.
Yep. Yeah.
So cool.
And it's, yeah. And we're not the only ones. I know there are a lot of them. And it's the other thing about these communities, plural, is that there's a podcasting community, and everybody is so friendly and helpful with equipment and tips. And there's a tabletop gaming community with Dungeons and Dragons and different flavors of that. And they're all really helpful and inspiring with stories. And then there's the steampunk community, and all of those people we're also open-minded and sharing stories and different things like that. And just bringing it all together is what really makes this the coolest thing ever. I've not once come across anybody who is negative about any of that stuff.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, this is a really cool thing to talk about the community, because it really can fuel the art that we do. And I do feel like we have the advantage of a really strong community when we're creating in steampunk.
Definitely. I mean, that's kind of that's how I met you. I mean, through Blue Stocking with, the Steampunk Dollhouse, one of my favorites too.
Shout out to Blue Stocking.
Yeah.
We love you.
Robbie says hi. It's met lots of people like that. And one of the things I like to do on my show, excuse me, is I like to put in commercial breaks. And not a single commercial you'll hear on my show was paid for, because essentially what I do is if there's a show I follow that I like, or any kind of maker, steampunk, Twitch streamer, whatever it might be, I'll reach out to them and say, hey, give me, an MP3. I'll put it on the show because I'd like to promote what you do, because I really like what you do. So, I've gotten bumpers from, other podcasters and shows, and some of them are steampunk, some aren't, but I just really like that. And we do a lot of share and share alike. It's great, just expanding the community.
That's such a cool model, and something that creators can think about. I really thank you for sharing that. Behind the scenes. Now, speaking of behind the scenes, so everyone watching the video on YouTube, so this is I said that really funny. everyone watching this on YouTube, they can see this amazing steampunk office that Michael is creating in. Now, Michael also has a really cool podcast studio. If you go to his Patreon, you can check out his behind the scenes of that podcasting studio and setup. So if you're really into this, go there. And if you want to follow his stories, going and supporting him through Patreon is a great way to do that. And he's absolutely someone who gives back in the community, and I think he deserves our support. So check that out. And then, but let's talk about what this environment that you're in. Is there anything you want to show us there in your office?
Yeah, it's kind of, my wife has decided not too long ago that minimalism is the way to go.
I'm with her. I actually listened to that podcast. If no one's checked it out, it's called The Minimalists.
Yes.
Really popular.
Oh yeah. My wife became a huge fan of that. And she's like, all right, let's just pack everything up and just take out what we need. And I'm like, I can't. This is, to me, this is another aspect of steampunk. Costuming is a thing, and art is a thing. And I kind of turned my office into a work of art because another feel for steampunk to me is what I like to call Victorian clutter.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I could just swing this around a little bit and just get a brief idea of what my walls look like.
Oh my gosh. So cool.
Yeah. My office has 14 clocks. And none of them work.
Nice.
Or they're running on different times. I don't know what zone is what anymore, but it's a lot of times when I'm writing, I like the sound of all the clocks ticking, especially writing in steampunk.
So they tick, but they're just not the right time.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So which is good when it comes time to, change the clocks. I could just let them go.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's
minimalism
right
kind of.
here.
That's kind of like functional minimalism.
Yeah, exactly. I'll go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I can't think of anything that I want to. I keep wanting to do more. My wife Melanie, by the way, who the books are also dedicated to because she is my inspiration. She's like, what more? Sweet. Yeah. She's like, what more can you do in here? And I said, well, the ceiling's blank. So.
Oh, you're going to go, is it Michelangelo? I'm saying it wrong.
I'm not. No, I'm not going to do I'm not going to do a Sistine Chapel. I was thinking about using some sort of foam painted and cut to look like the iron bands of the inside of a submarine or something. Do the jewels burn. So it just go nuts. And I still have the recording studio downstairs, which is our partially finished basement. And there are walls down there that need a lot of thing. I did have some clocks, but they were interfering with the sound. So now there are clocks frozen in time.
Interesting that those would interfere.
Yeah. They pick up really well. A lot of the equipment that we have is actually really good. And it's actually one of my mixers there.
Yeah. So cool. Well, it really does have an awesome steampunk vibe, and just, it's okay if you don't have like some specific thing to show us. It just has such a cool overall look.
Thank you. Yeah. I can show you. I'm away from the microphone. That's bad. There you go. Good old steampunk hat.
Hey, awesome.
The goggles I made myself. So, and that's another big steampunk thing is the whole DIY. A lot of people make their own costumes and things like
Michael, that. I'm so sorry. Could you show it one more time? Because when I responded, It clicked to me. So.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Oh, that's so cool with the steamrollers cards in there.
Yeah, I wear this at conventions and to like Ren fairs and things like that. And I stick the cards in there so that people will ask about it, so that I can say, it's Victorian science fiction, or run away.
And it's also very card sharky in a way.
Yes.
Oh man, that's so cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing a little bit with us. And, podcasting is not for the faint of heart, or at least not it's a lot of work, basically. And I
It
have
is.
really appreciated getting to know you in the community as I've started mine. And you've been so warm and welcoming. Michael is just an amazing person. And anything else you want to touch on when it comes to your podcast?
I don't know. Well, if anybody out there listening to your show is listening for steampunk authors and whatnot, and you say, yes, I do have books, but the show is kind of like an extension of that. It's an audio drama / comedy game playing adventure series that's kind of ongoing. And I guess my advice to people would be explore transmedia. I wanted to be a writer, and then I saw there are so many other ways to tell stories and have them intertwined. My new book, for example, Clockwork Pandora, which is a follow up to the first one. There is a dedication to a couple of people named Larry and Teresa. Those people do not exist.
Oh.
That dedication is to a couple of fictional characters from the podcast who threatened me into dedicating a book to them. So it's like, I love to have things intertwine. If you listen to our show, there's all kinds of Easter eggs into the books, and some things from the books refer to the show. It's not necessary for you to do both. It's just more fun. It's a more broad adventure, I guess, if you will.
Oh, cool. So they are completely standalone.
Yes. Yeah, and each season, we just started recording season 3 of the shows. We're about halfway through season 2. Each season is its own story, and they are chaptered. So, if you are going to listen to one of the stories, you could definitely jump in anywhere, see if you like it. If you do, go to the beginning of that season. And if you like that, jump to the beginning of the show. I think we got better as we went along. Season 3, we actually have a cast of 10 people. And if the unique thing about our season 3, which will be coming up probably around August, is this is a time of war. The Imperial North and the Confederate South have started fighting again. And what I decided to do was to take 2 groups of gamers, one for each faction, and they would play separately. But what they do in the story will influence the outcome of the war. And my 3rd novel is on hold until that finishes, because however that ends up will become canon for the ongoing story.
Okay, now this is a question that popped up for me, and I think I've figured it out for me, but just in case someone else is having the same question.
Oh, sure.
When you talk about gaming, it's a virtual game. It's not, is there a game people go out and buy and play at this point?
Not yet. No. The closest, there are a lot of role-playing games out there. There's a Force and Destiny. That's a Star Wars game. There's things based on H.P. Lovecraft. Of course, there's the original Dungeons and Dragons, and there have been different variations of that. I decided to take the role-playing aspect of all of those, and essentially I set the framework. For anyone who's not familiar with how these games go, I set the framework, the story. I give you a setting. You have a character that you've created that can be an airship pilot, a pirate, a soldier, an investigator, anything like that. And I give you the scenario, and you go. You tell me what you would do. And there are moments where we have chance, and that's where the dice come in. And this is
hold it a little closer because it's not zooming in.
All right, let's see if we get that. Oh, the light would be on that.
Oh, actually, will you say something as you do it, because it's on me for some reason?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. This is 20-sided die, and whenever we have an opportunity for chance to come up, there is a 1 in 20 chance for something to happen that relates to different charts and whatnot, and so there's some risk involved in the game story, but most of it is just role play. It's I tell you come to 2 doors. You tell me which door you open, or if you open a door at all. or maybe you climb through a window.
That is so cool.
And,
So for someone who's completely not into games, it's kind of like a choose your adventure story, but a lot of people are writing that as you're experiencing it, which is so cool.
Yeah, that's an awesome way to put it. That's exactly what it is. It's like a choose your own adventure. And we try to make our show be more like you're listening to an audio adventure than you are a game. There's little dice rolling. There's less dice rolling than that you'd find in a D&D game. And we do periodically, I also have what I call LARP episodes, which are more audio drama shows where me and a good friend of mine, Rupert Bathurst of T-Powered Theater, he does the narration for me. Fantastic British accent.
Awesome.
What we do is he and I put together a dramatic interlude that kind of blends the story together, brings some concrete flavor to or bonds the story together. So it's not just a game. The game becomes a story. The story is related to the books. It's all like one giant expanding universe.
Oh my gosh, the possibilities are they're endless. This is such a cool way to get into the cross form creation like you're talking about. What was your word for it?
Transmedia.
Yeah. To be a transmedia creator.
Yeah. I mean, one of the first podcasters I really enjoyed was JC Hutchins, and he talked a lot about transmedia. And there have been things where authors would, their books would come with an envelope with artifacts related to what's in the story. Or I've listened to actually a couple of podcasts, they're like audio drama things where you have to put in information, including like your cell number, because what'll happen is, you'll be listening to the show and you'll hear a character on the show say, "I need help, please call me." And you dial it, or they'll dial your phone and you'll answer your phone and you'll hear somebody asking for help, and it's coming right out of the show and it's involving you in this third dimension. That's really fascinating. And that's the whole transmedia thing is the getting the listener or the viewer involved, becoming part of the show. And we do that too. We take, my blog novel, The Whole Heart of Bronze thing. Yeah. I mentioned that there's a fantasy element that's got witches and ghouls and things like that. Would not have happened if not for one suggestion. Because when it was a blog novel, I would ask people after every week, what kind of thing you want to see next? Or I want to introduce a new character. Who is that character? Or what happens to the bad guy? And somebody out of the blue, a friend of mine, Jackie from work, said, "Hey, how about a teenage witch?" And I'm like, "Witch? There's no witches in my..." And I thought, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to run with it. So I made a steampunk witch, and it became an entire history. And now, an evil corporation is behind creating, turning little girls into witches and things like that. So it's blown up. It's a lot of fun.
Oh my goodness. It's a way to forge into this territory.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, anybody out there who's a novel writer, here's a suggestion for you. This could be a lot of fun. Take one of your characters and give them a Twitter account.
Totally.
I'm just saying, add that extra dimension. People will read your books and it's like they'll see your character on Twitter and it's like they're a real person and interact. And it's just, it's a lot of fun.
Well, that kind of goes into my last question for you, Michael. So looking at steampunk, what would you like to see from steampunk or from podcasting, punk-related podcasting? And what you just said is one idea. Any other observations as we go into the future?
I think what I would like to see, one of the reasons I really love your show is that there is more than one punk out there. I like the fact that, it wasn't until your show that I knew steampunk and dieselpunk, and that was it. To hear that there's so many other kinds of story elements and things that you get in different time periods, like cyberpunk. And I just really would encourage people to, if they have something that they love, look into it and see if there's a punk for it. And if not, make it and run with it and just have fun, tell stories and involve people. And I am hoping that, in my experience, this isn't true, but I just don't want to see anything adversarial. I don't want there to be a punk war. I think we can all play together in the same sandbox,
Yeah. Okay. Well, one last recommendation of where people can go to connect with your work.
Well, you could find anything you need to know about me and the first 90 some episodes of the show on my website. It's www.riggstories.com. That's RIGG stories. And I'm also, the podcast itself is hosted by Libsyn. So it's Steamrollers Adventure Podcast.libsyn.com. And our Patreon is patreon.com//Steamrollers Adventure Podcast. And failing any of that, if you just wanted to talk to me or ask me any questions, chat, start a whole conversation on steampunk or storytelling or anything, you can just write to me at steamrollersadventurepodcast@gmail.com.
Oh, so good. Thank you. And have a wonderful day creating all this amazing art that you do.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun.
Okay, so awesome. Thank you again to Michael for his time in interviewing with me. And I know we went a little bit over, so I'll just keep this really short. Please head to cindygrigg.com or check out my other site, theproductiveauthor.com, if you have author questions or you're looking for your next read. And other than that, I just hope you're having a wonderful beginning of the summer. And actually, it's kind of in full swing. Summer goes fast, right? So live it up, but also work on some of your creative projects, hopefully. And I will talk with you next time.